Hi there, you're listening to Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time is Euan Edworthy, a British man who's called Prague home for the last 3 decades. Over that period, Euan has been involved in a number of notable initiatives, including building a monument to Czechoslovak WWII RAF aviators in the city's Klárov district, and for those sterling efforts, was awarded the UK honour the MBE, Member of the British Empire, for services to Czech-British relations. We spoke at the offices of Euan Edworthy's company, Best Communications, right in the heart of Prague's Old Town, for this edition of Prague Talk. So Euan, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and what brought you here to Prague.
I'm British. I was born in Salisbury. My mother is Scottish and my father is Anglo-Irish. My father was in the Royal Air Force, so we travelled a great deal when I was younger. And then basically usual things, school, university, and then I started a career in public relations in 1991, working in London. Then I got a bit restless and I went to China and Hong Kong and worked there. And then, bizarrely, a headhunter called me and said, would you fancy working in the Czech Republic in Prague? So I was dying to get back to Europe and flew over and accepted the job and I arrived here in 1994.
And the job was with Czech Invest, which is the state investment agency.
Well, the job actually was with a PR company called Schillen, but their main client was Czech Invest. So when I was doing the interviews, it was specifically for this role. So I came out and it was, I was fell in love with Prague from day one. Especially it was such a huge contrast from my experience in Asia, and coming back to ancient Central Europe was just joyful. And my client was very professional. There was a bit of a language barrier. You know, they didn't speak much English, and my Czech wasn't really up to scratch. But we managed to communicate somehow, and that's how my career started in the Czech Republic.
That time is known by many people as the Wild East period here in Prague. How did you find doing business in that era?
It was fascinating. I mean, you know, it was like a dream come true, actually. There was so many opportunities, and I very much doubt opportunities will come like that again, especially in Europe. So it was a real excitement. I mean, communism had ended, there was optimism, you had a fantastic president called Václav Havel, everybody felt as though they could contribute to society, and I suppose, you know, what was quite fascinating in those days was there was a strong work ethic. It was extremely fun in terms of playing very hard as well. So it was never a boring evening, put it that way.
In those days, Klaus was in government. Did you interact with him or any of the other top politicians?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I suppose we were all quite excited by Klaus when we arrived here in 94. He was seen as, you know, the last Thatcherite left in Europe. He was basically going through a period of privatization. Strangely enough, if you look at the international media at that period, there wasn't a single word of criticism towards Klaus or really the Czech government. So good to see how things changed so quickly over time.
Not so long after you arrived in Prague, you set up your own company, Best Communications. Who are your clients and what is your focus?
Okay, so basically I started Best in 1995. So over that period of time, we must have had over 200 clients. And, you know, when I started the agency, I started with a very good friend of mine called Magdalena Lubieska. Magdalena was Polish, I was British, and we set up a PR company in the Czech Republic, and we didn't have a single client. So we worked in this 12 square meter office in Prague 5 with a fax machine and one mobile. And then fortunately, we did a bit of self-promotion. I organised the first Conquer tournament in the Czech Republic, which made a few people giggle. And then we worked for Sebastian Pavlovsky, and he had just acquired the Markiopoulos case Janáček manuscript. So we had a big PR event about him bringing it back to the Czech Republic. And then after that, things just moved in the right direction. We were very lucky. We set up the company at the right time. So we ended up working for clients at the beginning, such as British Airways, Midland Bank, Gillette, Procter & Gamble. And of course, my own background was in property PR. So we ended up working for numerous developers, as we still do today. And today we have 30 clients, we have 20 people, and all our clients are quite diverse. So we do health sector, property, aerospace, corporate communications, financial, public affairs. So a diverse space.
Has it been an advantage to you being a Brit? Is it seen as prestigious that they're hiring a British company?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think to begin with, as we were known as the Anglo-Czech PR firm, and I did have an advantage with my competitors in that I had worked for the big agencies globally. So I was slightly ahead of the game to begin with. But everyone's caught up, and I think today we're very much seen as the sort of Czech international PR firm, and that's how it is.
Best Communications is named after George Best, I believe?
Yeah, George Best. So as a child, he was my hero, George Best.
Wasn't he a bit before your time, a little bit?
As a child in the 1970s, I was actually in the US when he went out to play. And of course, my father was a massive George Best fan, so we were brought up with this excitement in our house. And so when I came to Prague, it was quite funny. I had an Irish lawyer who set up my company, and our company was originally Irish. And he said to me, I said to him, who do you think the most famous Irishman is? And he went, George Best. And I went, yeah, me as well. And that's how the name came, so Best Communications.
Is it true you also met George Best?
I met George Best in the Feeney Arms in London. And
what state was he in?
He's incredibly polite. I mean, it was 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening, but he couldn't be nicer. We just talked about, the state of Fulham football. So great.
Generally, how do you think the Czechs? I know it's a big question, but how do you think the Czechs perceive the British?
It's a very good question again. I mean, it's funny. I kind of think we're quite similar. We're sort of both conservative with a small c. We're both quite formal societies. We're quite polite. We're both quite absurd as well. Our humour is quite similar and quite reserved, but then we all both share a passion for beer and wine. So, I feel as though that living as a Brit here, I've had no difficulties as a foreigner here. I've always felt very welcomed, actually.
One thing I learned about you preparing for this interview is that you played golf with Sean Connery. How did that come about?
Well, that was, again, amazing. I mean, I was at Karlstein Golf Club, and a friend of mine, Matthew Stillman, who owns Still King Films, he was shooting a film, I think, with Sean Connery. So then we had a Ryder Cup competition, and Sean Connery made up part of the Ryder Cup team. And it was great. So when I met him, I was dying to ask him about the Bond films, but I didn't. But I spoke to him about Scottish devolution. And then he would then invite me out for a beer in the evening. So it was quite an experience.
In 2004, you initiated a speaker's corner here in Prague, modelled, of course, after the one in Hyde Park in London. How did that work, or where was that?
Yeah, that was interesting. That was at the time where, let's say, very prominent businessmen were buying up the Czech media. And beforehand, it was basically international publishing houses that owned the media here. And I kind of thought, well, what was so important was there was a symbol for freedom of speech. So I wrote to Pavel Bem, who was then the mayor of Prague. I then even wrote to the House of Commons in the UK asking for their support. And I was then contacted by the Deputy Mayor, Rudolf Blaschek. And then we agreed to set up the first Speaker's Corner outside the UK back in 2004. What was very fascinating about it was that the Czechs, I believe, had to change their legislation, because prior to that, you had to have permission to have a gathering of over a certain number of people. And by providing the Speaker's Corner, it basically gave a platform for anybody to come down and speak their mind, so long as they weren't inciting hatred or race. Today it's still used. I see it often used by the trade unions. I see it often used by the environmentalists. So it's been quite a success.
Where is it?
It's in Palackého náměstí in Prague too. I know the Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park is rather different than the Speaker's Corner that we have here in Prague, but I think it's important to preserve these pillars of liberal democracies, especially today where there are challenges.
You were also behind the Winged Lion Memorial to Czech or Czechoslovak World War II RAF airmen. And in fact, that's where you and I first met at a ceremony by that monument. What was your motivation for being involved in that whole project?
Yeah, that was very interesting. So my father was an officer in the Royal Air Force. And when I said to him in 1994 that I was coming out to work in Prague, just before I jumped on the flight from Heathrow, he said, don't forget about those very brave Czech airmen who fought during the Second World War. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. So I sort of got on a plane, arrived in Prague, and then that year I was invited to a reception at the British Embassy, and I suddenly saw these servicemen, sort of 70 plus, all in uniform. So then I thought, okay, these are the guys that then, served our country during the Second World War. Anyway, I then did a bit of history on it, and I thought it was quite extraordinary that you had 2,500 plus volunteers joining the Royal Air Force to fight Nazi tyranny. And because of history, and because after 45, 48, the British community never had an opportunity to say thank you, to show our gratitude. So it's one of the loveliest stories, I think, with the British community since I've lived here. So I wrote to a couple of my friends and a few of my clients, and within, I think, 2 months, we had managed to raise over 100,000 euros to build a monument. So we commissioned this well-known sculptor in the UK called Constance Spofford. He then created the design, the winged lion. And then we had the unveiling in 2014 by Sir Nicholas Soames, MP, grandson of Winston Churchill. And I think it's a real bond between our two countries. I mean, and it's something really worth protecting and remembering. So it's really done for them and their descendants.
Also, you received an MBE from the Queen, I presume?
Well, yes, I was very surprised and amazed that I was given this honour. And really, it was an honour I see shared by all the people who supported the Winged Lion and Speaker's Corner. So it was basically for British-Czech relations. So for all the initiatives that I've done here, from the Children of Courage Awards, the Red Nose Day campaigns, to Speaker's Corners, to the Winged Lion Memorials, it's just there's so many unsung heroes. And because I've sort of been the initiator, I've been credited. And the Cross of Merit from the Czechs was even more of a surprise. But I see it as an honour which should be shared by all the people that have been involved in these initiatives and activities over the years.
My final question, you've been in Prague for 30 years, I presume you like it. What do you feel Prague has given you over that period?
I suppose Prague has been a wonderful platform to fulfill many ambitions that I set out at an early age in my life. So I always wanted to have my own company, and I managed to do that in Prague. But more importantly, I found my wife here. I have a great son, Nicholas, and basically it's been a wonderful home. So I never expected this. I'm very grateful for what I have, and I just think that the pace of life in Prague and the Czech Republic absolutely suits me. So happy 30 years.
Many thanks indeed to Euan Edworthy for that interview, and Klobok Dolu, or hats off, for all the initiatives that he's been involved in over the years. Prague Talk is a podcast from Radio Prague International, and if you've enjoyed this interview and are new to the pod, there are many, many more editions out there for your listening pleasure. But for now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you very much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.